Okay, so let's get started with the actual journal entries. The first one we're going to do is accrued revenues. And if you go back and look what I told you to write down, you'll see that it always applies. So Net Solutions signed an agreement with Danker Company on the 15th of December saying we will provide you services at $20 per hour. At the end of December, I've already provided 25 hours of service, but I haven't actually put the revenue on my books. At the end of the month, I have to record the revenue accrued, but yet not recorded. So I'm going to multiply these two numbers. And as I told you before, always debit accounts receivable, credit my revenue. Now my revenue account is called fees earned. Okay? So this journal entry is accrued revenues. It's always exactly the same debit and the same credit. The only thing that changes is how much. Now, let me ask you, let's go back to your 3 rules of adjusting entries, and let's ask you about them. Does this involve cash? No, you do not see cash here at all. Rule number 2, is it dated the last day of the accounting period? Yes, December 31st is our last day. Third rule, it'll always have an income statement account and a balance sheet account. So the accounts receivable is on the balance sheet. Fees earned as a revenue is on the income statement. So it actually meets all of our rules. Okay, so this is the adjusting entry, 1 of 6. Always the same debit, always the same credit. I know I sound like a nag, but honestly, if you were in class with me right now, I'd be doing the same thing. I'd make you write it down. I would repeat it 20 times. Okay? Now, what we're going to look at on the next screen says, hey, if we didn't make this adjustment, what would happen to our accounts? And so this is important to know. If I left this particular adjusting entry off, my revenues would be understated, my net income would be understated, my assets would be understated, and my equity be understated. So after each adjusting entry, you're going to look at what were the effects if you omitted this particular entry. So basically, you're telling your stockholders you didn't make as much money as you did on this. Okay, I do not test on this. There's very little homework. Only one problem involves this, but I do not test on this knowledge, but you should know it. Okay, let's go to accrued expenses. Oh, I pay my employees bi-weekly. During December, I paid wages of $950 on the 13th and $1,200 on the 27th. These payments were not adjusting entries because it involved cash and it was not on the last day of the accounting period. At the end of the month, I owe my employees $250 of wages, but I am not paying them until January 10th. So I need to recognize the expense for the month of December by doing this journal entry. This is accrued expense. Remember, I told you it is always debit the wage expense and credit the wages payable. The question is for how much? Okay, that's up to you to decide. But the journal entry will always be in this order exactly the same. Okay, now what I'm going to show you is what journal entry would happen on January 10th. So keep in mind this $250 right here represents wage expenses for December. Okay, now anytime I have an account in wages payable, anytime I have a balance in my wages payable, on the very next payday it has to be removed, and the way to remove it is to debit it for $250. So here's what happens on January 10th. I pay $1,275 out for wages. This included $250 for the December wages. So here's my journal entry. This is not an adjusting entry because this involves cash. So I'm debiting the wages payable, which represented December's wages or December's expense, and I'm debiting wage expense for January. Okay, so these are this is not an adjusting entry. This just shows you what happens on the very next payday. Okay, and that kind of helps it. Now, if I forgot to do this journal entry, here's what would actually be happening. My expenses would be understated, but my net income would be overstated. Okay, so again, here are the effects if I left off accrued expenses. These were the accruals. On the next video, we're going to look at the deferrals.